The mornings on Paris Island always began with the same violence of sound, boots hitting pavement in unison, whistles cutting through humid air, the clipped voices of drill instructors commanding every movement until it felt mechanical. For most recruits, the third week of boot camp was the turning point, when rhythm settled in, when muscles began to remember what the mind still resisted. For Private Lauren Williams, it was the third week of humiliation. Every day carried the certainty that she would stumble, and every stumble drew the eyes of those eager to laugh at her expense. Her rifle rattled in her hands during inspection, betraying the slightest tremor she could not control. The weapon was supposed to feel like an extension of the body, but in hers, it was always awkward. Always a liability. When the squad formed up for weapons qualification, her shots missed wide. Bullets cut into dirt and empty air, while neat clusters from the others tore into black circles. A drill instructor lifted her score sheet, heavy with red ink, and stamped it with failure so hard the paper wrinkled. The sound of that stamp had become routine, an echo that followed her through each attempt. On the obstacle course, she lagged behind, arms shaking as she pulled her body up the rope wall. Others cleared it with fluid strength while she remained suspended, boot soles slipping until she fell hard into the dust. The sergeant's voice broke through the ringing in her ears, sharp and unforgiving, reminding her she was dragging down the unit. Laughter followed from one corner, not loud but cutting enough to remind her how far outside the group she stood. The barracks offered no relief. Recruits who had begun to bond over shared struggle left her at the margins. At chow, she sat alone with a tray she barely touched, staring at food that carried no taste. Conversation filled the hall with easy noise, but her space remained quiet. Silence became her companion, marking her as clearly as the disqualification sheets stacked in her file. Her body carried the marks of constant strain, blisters hardened on her palms, bruises spread across her shins, and her uniform was always damp with sweat before the sun had climbed fully. The exhaustion might have broken another recruit who simply lacked ability, but for Lauren it was not the body that failed her. It was the deliberate restraint she forced on herself. Every instinct told her she could have done more, but she held back until failure became her only identity. The repetition was relentless. Weapons, drill, obstacle, correction. The cycle turned like a wheel, grinding her down. She knew every misstep before it came. Yet she did nothing to stop it. Her lips repeated the same words whenever the sergeant demanded explanation, no excuse. Sire? She became fluent in defeat, and the phrase clung to her as tightly as her sweat-soaked uniform. When the sun set, the island never truly grew quiet. Insects hummed, and boots shuffled down walkways. But inside Lauren, the stillness deepened. She lay in her bunk rehearsing the day's mistakes until they blurred into one another. The sound of her rifle rattling, the sting of rope against palms, the taste of unchewed food, each detail carved the truth. She already knew her drill sergeant was ready to send her home. Yet beneath the despair, a deeper current moved. She had grown up with a rifle in her hands, hours spent at her uncle's range, competitions where accuracy came as naturally as breathing. She had known the thrill of shots landing center every time, of trophies that seemed too heavy for her age. Here, under the watch of Paris Island, she forced herself to miss, to stumble, to tremble. She did it not because she could not perform, but because she was afraid of how easily she could. Her fear was not of failure. It was of success. Each time she lined up her sights, she imagined not a paper target, but a living figure. The thought chilled her, because she knew the bullet would land exactly where she placed it. So she chose to be clumsy, to live in the margins, to let shame become a shield. The others believed she was hopeless. The sergeant believed she was done. But beneath the repetition of mistakes and the silence of isolation, Lauren Williams carried the truth. She could not yet admit she was not incapable. She was hiding. The chow hall was loud, with trays clattering and voices carrying over one another. But for Lauren Williams, the noise only deepened her isolation. She sat at the end of the table with food she could not taste, pushing it from side to side, while the others talked in clusters. They laughed over training bruises, retold stories of close calls on the obstacle course, and swapped bits of encouragement that never reached her. 3 weeks of failure had made her invisible, except when someone wanted to remind her of how badly she was doing. The humiliation was constant, the erasure almost complete. She wondered what she would tell her family when the discharge papers arrived. When the shadow fell across her tray, she expected another reprimand or another joke. Instead, she looked up and saw a man she did not recognize. His uniform carried no visible rank, yet his bearing made every other recruit nearby go quiet. His voice was calm but direct as he asked, "Are you Williams?" She nodded. He handed her a folded sheet of paper, sealed with red wax, and told her, "Private. You have new orders. Report to the tactical range in full combat gear." Her first thought was that this was the final notice, the formal dismissal. But the seal was not standard, and the paper felt heavier than any routine form. Her hands, which had shaken through every drill, were suddenly steady as she held it. The recruits around her whispered quickly, their eyes darting between the stranger and her. Some smirked, as if assuming it was punishment. Others looked wary, sensing authority they did not understand. Lauren slipped from the bench and followed the man outside. He offered no explanation as he walked across the yard, and she did not dare ask. The air was thick with heat, pressing down with the same weight that had smothered her since arrival. Yet something in her chest lifted, a faint flicker of possibility she had not felt in weeks. Each step carried her farther from the discharge she had feared and closer to something she could not name. They passed checkpoints she had never been cleared to enter. Marines at the gates gave quick nods, but asked no questions. The silence of recognition unsettled her, more than shouted orders ever had. She studied the folded paper again, tracing the seam of the wax with her thumb but not breaking it open. The act of unfolding could wait. For the moment, the paper itself was enough, an object that suggested she had not been erased but redirected. The restricted building they approached looked plain from the outside, a slab of concrete with no sign to mark its purpose. It seemed deliberately forgettable, the kind of place one could pass 100 times without noticing. Yet as she drew near, the air around it carried the hush of significance. She felt the weight of eyes she could not see, the sense of a line being crossed. Inside, she imagined corridors without labels, rooms where records were never filed, and voices that spoke in facts rather than ceremony. Whatever waited beyond those doors, it was not the end she had braced herself for in the chow hall. It was something else entirely. Her hands no longer trembled. She pressed the folded sheet flat against her thigh and realized the truth of what had just happened. What everyone else saw as failure had been seen differently by someone who mattered. Her mistakes had been the camouflage that kept her hidden until the right set of eyes looked closer. The paper was not an ending. It was an invitation, and with each step toward the building, she understood that unfolding it would not just reveal new orders, it would reveal who she truly was meant to be. The office smelled faintly of old paper and machine oil, an unusual contrast to the sharp sterility of the rest of Paris Island. Lauren Williams sat across from Commander Harper, her back straight, her hands clenched lightly in her lap. The desk between them was cluttered with files, photographs, and a single folder marked with stamps she had never seen before. Harper's eyes stayed on her, calm but unyielding, as if he already knew the answers to every question he was about to ask. He slid the folder open and pulled out a sheet. "Tell me about your uncle's security company," he said. His tone was even without accusation, but the words made her pulse jump. She answered quickly, repeating the line she had given her recruiter filing paperwork. "Answering phones. Basic equipment maintenance." Harper interrupted before she could continue. "According to your uncle, you spent most of your time on the shooting range." Lauren's stomach tightened. She had thought of those summers as her secret, hours at the range with rifles too large for her hands, learning how to steady her breathing until her aim cut clean through steel targets. It had been freedom then, not something meant for official record. She admitted softly that she enjoyed shooting in her free time. Harper did not smile. He pulled out another paper. Reading, without glancing at her. Regional competition in 2019. First place in women's precision rifle. First place in tactical pistol. Third overall against shooters with decades of experience. You were 17 years old. Her throat went dry. She remembered the medal, small and heavy, tucked into a box under her bed at home. She had never told anyone in her unit about it. He placed another page on the desk. State championship. The following year, 3 categories. All first place. Range officer noted your accuracy under pressure was unprecedented for your age. He looked up now, his eyes sharp. So you arrive at Parris Island with some of the best marksmanship credentials I have ever read. And you fail every weapons qualification. That does not add up. Lauren forced herself to breathe evenly. She tried to hold his gaze, but the silence pressed on her until she looked down at her hands. She whispered that she did not know what he wanted her to say. Harper leaned back in his chair, studying her. I think you are deliberately failing. I want to know why. The words struck harder than any reprimand. She had hidden behind clumsiness, behind silence, behind the role of the inept recruit. But Harper was pulling it all apart. Her voice trembled as she asked for permission to speak freely. He nodded once. She admitted the truth slowly, piecing it together as if each word carried weight. She had come to serve her country, believing in discipline and sacrifice. But during her first week, she realized what the training really meant. It was not about targets or medals. It was about killing. And she was very good at it. Too good. She confessed that it did not scare her to hit a target. What scared her was how natural it felt when the target was meant to represent a human life. Her voice grew firmer as she went on. In civilian competitions, there had always been safety, a clear separation between sport and consequence. But in the scenarios here, with silhouettes shaped like people in drills, designed to simulate combat, she discovered that her mind adjusted too easily. She did not hesitate. She could end a life as effortlessly as she had collected trophies. And that realization frightened her more than failure ever could. The silence in the office deepened. Harper closed the folder and rested his hand on it as though sealing the past back inside. For a long moment he said nothing, and Lauren felt shame crawl over her like heat. Then he spoke with quiet certainty. You are not afraid of missing. Williams, you are afraid of what happens when you stop pretending to miss. The truth lay bare on the desk between them. Medals hid in boxes. Testimony written in black ink. And her own fear revealed at last. Tactical Range Charlie did not look like any training ground Lauren Williams had seen before. From the outside, it was just another block of concrete hidden at the far edge of the base. Inside, the corridors opened into a vast expanse of steel and sand berms, stretching far beyond the length of a football field. Digital displays blinked faint green. Targets lined the walls at distances up to 1,500 meters. And overhead lights hummed with an industrial chill. The air smelled of cordite and oil, a reminder that live ammunition was the only language spoken here. A woman approached with a stride that carried the weight of experience. She was tall, broad-shouldered, her uniform stripped of rank but marked with the confidence of someone who had seen combat up close. I am Rachel, she said simply. There was no handshake, no ceremony. Her eyes swept Lauren once, as if measuring her against an invisible standard, then flicked toward the row of precision rifles, resting on a table. Pick one. Today we see what you can really do. Lauren's hand hovered before settling on a long rifle, fitted with a heavy barrel and advanced optics. The weapon felt balanced, alive in her grip, so different from the clumsy rattle of her issued M16. Rachel led her to a firing lane where targets shimmered at distances she had never attempted under stress. A clipboard held rows of grease-penciled grids. Hit what I call, Rachel said, no hesitation. The first sequence began with still targets at 200 meters. Lauren adjusted her breathing. squeezed, and each shot landed tight in the center. Rachel's expression did not change. The distances increased, the angles sharper, targets shifting in unpredictable rhythms. Lauren's hands steadied with every pull of the trigger. Shot groupings formed clean patterns on the paper, each mark a quiet admission that her talent could no longer be hidden. Then Rachel added pressure. Sirens blotted. Lights strobed, and moving silhouettes appeared, some armed, some shaped as civilians. The chaos forced split-second judgment. Lauren tracked her crosshairs from threat to non-threat, firing only when she was certain. Bullets punched through hostile silhouettes, while unarmed figures passed untouched. Rachel watched closely, her jaw set, as Lauren demonstrated restraint under the flood of noise. The drills grew harder. Obstacles forced her to fire while crouched, prone. Even while navigating uneven terrain, simulated with shifting platforms, sweat slid down her neck. But her breathing remained steady. At one point, Rachel shouted, "Two hostiles. One shielded. One exposed. Decide." Lauren shifted angles, used the delay of a moving barricade, and placed a round through the exposed threat without risking the shielded figure. Rachel noted it with the faintest nod. Hours passed in a blur of precision. The final test was the longest shot, a target barely visible at 1,500 meters. The range fell silent. Lauren adjusted windage, corrected for drift, and let the world narrow to the clean circle of glass before her. She exhaled, squeezed, and watched the distant target jerk with impact. A single hole in the exact center. Rachel stepped forward, voice low but firm. "Outstanding. Harper was right." She tapped the grease-penciled board where Lauren's groupings were marked. Each line of perfect hits formed a map of what could no longer be denied. Lauren set the rifle down carefully, her hands steady, but her heart racing. Exhilaration mixed with dread as she realized she had crossed a threshold. Her skill was real, undeniable, and dangerous. Yet under Rachel's gaze, she understood something new. It could be guided, shaped into discipline rather than fear. The clean hit was more than a bullet striking paper. It was the truth, sharp and impossible to ignore. The building Lauren Williams entered had no sign and no posted guard. Only a door that opened when she pressed the folded orders against a scanner. Inside, the corridors were dim and unadorned, lined with gray paint that reflected nothing. The air was cool and still, heavy with the scent of metal polish and recycled air. No plaque, no banners, no evidence of pride or ownership marked the place. It was a facility designed to exist without existing. The first week blurred into a rhythm that felt both ordinary and strange. There were classes, but no roll calls. She sat at long tables with other recruits whose names she never learned. They studied language tapes that repeated in soft monotones. Syllables drilled until her tongue formed shapes that did not belong to English. She repeated each phrase carefully, jotting notes on laminated sheets that could be wiped clean at the end of the day. The laminated drift charts reminded her of field sketches, but carried no signatures. Just data that belonged to no one. Training halls branched off the main corridor, each designed for a different discipline. One room housed surveillance simulations, with cameras mounted high and a grid of monitors flickering with crowded street scenes. Lauren learned to track patterns, to notice the single figure that lingered too long near a door, the man who moved against the current of a crowd. She marked her observations in shadowy logbooks, where names were never written, only times, places, and movements. Every entry was faceless, as if the identities of both the observer and the observed had been erased. Other halls carried the low hum of psychological tests. Recruits were placed in simulated stress environments, forced to hold cover identities under pressure, to lie convincingly, while machines measured pulse and breath. Lauren found it unsettling to answer questions with a name that was not hers. But the instructors demanded not only fluency, but comfort in the lie. She learned to slow her heartbeat, to let false details fall from her tongue as though they belonged to her since childhood. Cultural immersion followed. Rooms dressed like cafes, market stalls, or apartments shifted every week. They carried the smell of unfamiliar spices, the rhythm of music she had never heard before, the chatter of dialects she had just begun to study. She walked through these spaces like an actor without applause, rehearsing gestuures, learning how to blend until her presence left no trace. The days stretched long but not monotonous. Each hour carried weight, pressing her deeper into a world without acknowledgement. There were no uniforms beyond plain fatigues. No, insignia to mark progress. No instructor ever said her name. When she passed tests, they simply handed her another laminated sheet, another set of instructions, another challenge to be completed in silence. Failure was corrected quickly and without ceremony. Success vanished into the next task, as though it had never happened. At night, in her narrow quarters, Lauren sat with her notes. The language tapes whispered through headphones. The same syllables repeated until she could speak them without thought. She practiced writing them on cards and then erased them, leaving no evidence behind. Her desk held no photographs, no letters, no medals from her past. Only the folded orders remained tucked into a pocket. The last link to the identity she was meant to shed. She began to feel both erased and strangely anchored. The erasure frightened her at first, the absence of recognition, the vanishing of her name. Yet with each day she felt a new clarity. This was a place where competence spoke louder than reputation. Her worth was measured not in scores shouted by drill instructors, but in how well she disappeared into the tasks. Walking through the halls, she noticed how others carried themselves. They moved with quiet precision, speaking rarely, their eyes alert but unreadable. They were guardians stripped of identity, existing only in the gaps where others could not act. Lauren realized she was becoming one of them. The clean hit at the range had revealed what she could do. This place was teaching her why it mattered. The most important guardians were not celebrated, they were invisible, serving without name, protecting without recognition. For the first time, she understood that the absence of acknowledgement was not punishment. It was the very definition of the duty she was being shaped to carry. The lights dimmed inside the simulation chamber until only the glow of the digital screens remained. Lauren Williams adjusted her stance, rifle steady against her shoulder, the laminated card of grease pencil notes clipped to her vest. Beside the firing lane, a stopwatch ticked without sound. Its red light marking the seconds, Rachel stood in the shadows, arms crossed. Her presence felt more than seen. The first sequence began without warning. A hallway appeared on the screen, figures emerging in rapid succession. Some carried rifles. Others were unarmed, civilians stumbling through chaos. Lauren's crosshairs swept across the shapes, her finger light on the trigger. She fired once, twice, then stopped cold as a mother carrying a child ran into view. The temptation to fire and secure the lane surged through her, but she forced her breath steady. Letting the moment pass, the hostile fell. The civilians cleared. The program escalated. A marketplace flickered into existence, crowded with moving silhouettes. Hostile actors were hidden among the civilians, their weapons appearing and vanishing as if timed to provoke mistakes. Lauren shifted positions, heart pounding but movements calm. She waited through false cues, striking only when the threat aligned with certainty. Each shot was precise, no stray round marking the backdrop. Civilians scattered unharmed. Rachel's voice cut once through the intercom, level but sharp. You hesitate. You lose hostages. You fire too quickly. You kill them yourself. Which choice do you make? Lauren answered with action. A masked figure dragged a hostage into view. Pressing a pistol against the captive's head, Lauren adjusted for angle and breath, then waited. 1 heartbeat. 2. When the hostage ducked a fraction, she placed a single round, Through the abductor's temple. The captive dropped, but alive. The stopwatch light blinked. Another sequence loaded. A schoolroom filled the screen. Children's silhouettes crouched under desks. Hostiles burst in with rifles raised. Lauren moved fast, eliminating threats one by one, but always careful to angle her shots above the tiny outlines hiding in the corner. The scenario ended in silence. The desks intact, her chest rose and fell, but her hands never shook. Rachel stepped closer, her figure visible in the low light. She studied the groupings on the target display, holes clustered where no margin for error should have existed. Her face revealed nothing, but her silence carried approval. Lauren lowered the rifle, her finger easing away from the trigger. She realized the fear that had once gripped her was fading. The danger was not in her talent. It was in believing she had none. Here, under impossible pressure, her strength had revealed itself, not only in clean hits, but in the moments she refused to fire. The stopwatch clicked to a halt. The chamber lights rose. Rachel turned away, leaving Lauren with the target still glowing on the screen. The lesson was clear. Precision was expected. Restraint was the true test. The room Harper chose for the briefing was bare except for a steel table and 2 chairs. The walls held no insignia, no photographs, nothing to suggest ownership. A single lamp cast its circle of light across a folder sealed with red tape. Harper sat with his arms resting on the table, his voice steady as he told Lauren Williams the truth of the program she had entered. He began with the words she least expected. What we do here never happened. He opened the folder and spread photographs across the table. They showed city streets that looked ordinary. Crowds moving. Markets open. Then he flipped to a second set. The same places captured days earlier, where armed groups had gathered, weapons staged, and violence was imminent. He explained that the intervention of operators like her had dissolved those threats before they reached open conflict. No shots fired that anyone could prove. No headlines. No memorials. Only silence left behind. Lauren leaned forward, studying the images. The difference between chaos and calm was undeniable. Yet no one outside that room would ever know what had shifted the course. Harper slid a logbook toward her, its pages heavy with black ink. Entire sections had been crossed out until only fragments remained coordinates. Dates. Nothing else. The names of operators, the specifics of missions, erased with deliberate finality. Rachel entered quietly and set another logbook on the table. This one was slimmer, the lines crisp, but every name was gone, replaced with black bands that left the page unreadable. She said little, only reminding Lauren that recognition was never the purpose. The victory, Rachel explained, is when nothing happens. When a war no one else saw never begins. The weight of it settled over Lauren. She thought of boot camp, of score sheets and public failures, of laughter from recruits who had watched her stumble. That world measured value in visible achievement, in medals and shouted praise. Here, value was measured in silence, in erasure so complete that even success vanished. Harper folded the photographs and replaced them in the folder. He told her that medals were for battles already lost, for recognition that arrived too late. What mattered here was prevention. Invisible threads pulled before anyone else noticed they existed. She listened, feeling the contradiction coil inside her, fear at the idea of disappearing into anonymity, but also a strange sense of relief. To serve without spectacle meant no performance, only purpose. Her eyes lingered on the sealed folder. As Harper closed it, the lamp's light caught the tape, glowing faint red, before shadow reclaimed the edges. She understood now that every action from this point forward would be buried beneath silence. No one would speak her name. No one would know the lives saved by her restraint. Yet the absence of acknowledgement no longer felt like punishment. It was the proof of the role she had been chosen for. Lauren left the room with the image of those blacked-out pages fixed in her mind. True power lay not in the stories told, but in the wars erased before they began. The room was silent, except for the low hum of the overhead light. Harper set a folder on the table and leaned back in his chair. His words carried no threat. Only wait. He told Lauren Williams she had two choices. She could leave with a discharge. Her failures neatly recorded. Her life, her own again. Or she could accept what waited here service, without recognition. A path defined by silence, sacrifice, and no return. Lauren's eyes moved to the roster board propped against the wall. Lines of names filled the columns. But one slot remained blank. The absence felt louder than any order she had received. She thought of her bunk in the barracks. Sheets already folded. The space she had occupied for 3 weeks of humiliation. If she walked away now, that emptiness would follow her home. She weighed the fear that had once driven her to fail deliberately. She had been terrified of discovering how easily she could kill. Now she understood that fear had not been weakness. It had been caution. The awareness that her gift carried consequences. Here, under Harper's gaze. She realized the truth. Her restraint was not a burden. It was the very reason she had been chosen. Harper waited without pressure. The decision was hers alone. Lauren inhaled slowly, steadying herself, and stepped closer to the roster. Her hand hovered above the blank line. Not to sign, but to acknowledge it. A threshold, a doorway into a life where her successes would never be spoken of. She accepted that silence with calm resolve. When she turned back, she no longer looked like a failed recruit. She looked like someone who had chosen the shadows willingly. Weeks passed, and the rhythm of shadow training became Lauren Williams's new reality. Each morning began without announcement. She was never called by name, never listed on a manifest forte. Yet her presence was expected. She moved through language drills, surveillance exercices, and tactical runs with a focus that left no room for hesitation. Her folded orders remained tucked into her pocket, worn soft at the creases, a reminder of the moment when her old life ended and this one began. Her results spoke in silence. Targets struck with precision, simulated hostages extracted without error, coded transmissions intercepted cleanly. None of it was recorded under her name. Logbooks listed only times and outcomes, never signatures. But the instructors noticed. They gave no praise, only the faintest nods. When her work reshaped a scenario, other recruits began to adjust their own methods after watching her, copying her quiet efficiency without acknowledging her openly. Influence spread like a shadow across the room, unspoken but undeniable. In her hands, the grease pencil became more than a tool. She carried it through every drill, marking quick notes on laminated sheets that were wiped clean each night. The pencil left faint grooves, traces of effort that vanished under new layers, but never quite disappeared. The act mirrored her own role, evidence of impact without recognition. At night, she returned to her quarters where silence held steady. There were no medals, no cheers, no stories recorded for history. Yet as she studied her notes, she felt a quiet pride settle in her chest. The measure of her service was not in acknowledgement but in prevention. In the crises erased before they began, her legacy would not be spoken, but it would live in the unseen ripples she left behind.